cresting the first of what would soon to be many hills on this Saturday morning. Welcome back to the Sunshine State Rails on September 25th. Hopping in the left turn lane after crossing Lakeland Junction, we didn't exactly have any plans for the day right off the bat, but it would actually turn out to be quite the expedition by the end of it all. Making the left turn onto Kathleen Road and then the left turn into what we call the daycare, we'd sit there for a little bit since it was Saturday and pretty much nothing runs around here in the mornings. Though on the contrary to last weekend, we'd actually strike luck this time. About 20 minutes go by and it's about 10 o'clock a.m. and the cantilever signals at Lakeland Junction have come up to a slow approach, which would direct a southbound train off of this track 2 over the crossovers to track 1 and a right turn around Lakeland Junction, but being prepared to stop at the very next signal right around the corner as something else was on the way. After driving around for a bit to try to find some cool spots, I stumbled upon one by accident. Only about 2,000 feet from the junction where we just were, an abandoned parking lot of an abandoned building that actually had some really nice lighting. So we pulled in here and waited on the southbound K811. Empty phosphate hoppers off of the BNSF Railway at Cicero, Illinois, back down to CSX's Bone Valley, just south of Winston Yard. 2 of their motors made their way onto the train for the trip back south.
Q45225 lead motor 3338, clear Lakeland connection. Stop it.
On the straight portion of the Y, that is Lakeland Junction, Q452 coming north out of Miami with mixed freight traffic for Waycross had just ran down the hill into Winston Yard, running by the outer portion of Lakeland Junction in front of K811, which is why they gave him that yellow signal that we saw earlier. Though now that 452 is down the hill and has since backed into Winston Yard, K811 has had his signals upgraded and can run down to the yard himself. As 811 rounds the south leg of the Lakeland Junction Y, we can see off in the background behind the overpass the continuing construction of the Bonnet Springs Park. I haven't done an update on this place in quite some time, and in that time they've made a mecca of progress. K811 then crosses from the Lakeland Junction Y to the main line, running past South Lakeland, the site of the recently demolished Amtrak station. 5,000 feet of empty jumbo hoppers rounding Lakeland Junction, especially from the air, is definitely something neat to see. I was gonna attempt to chase 811 down to Winston Yard to get a shot of him pulling in, but nah, I heard a couple other things on the radio that were a little more interesting. Q603, a nightly mixed freight out of Waycross, Georgia to Winston Yard again, normally passing this area anywhere between 1 and 5 a.m., was a little late on the takeoff last night, and now the sun has come up and he's just now getting down here, as he rounds the same leg of the Y that K811 just did, except he is not getting his signals upgraded just yet. He's gonna have to stop. They'd pull around the south leg and stop as the dispatcher made the decision to run 0738 out of Winston Yard and by the connection first. This Q452 and K811 had halted these guys from getting out of the yard, so now with this light traffic frenzy in the area, it was their turn to go. Led today by an EMD SD40-3 and another Yellow-Nose 2 AC4400, just like the one on Q603, 0738 is, to my knowledge, a daily local out of Winston Yard, handling most prevalently rock loads for Davenport and points around. He can also work any customers in need between here and there, most commonly Auburndale, which is where the few white covered hoppers on the bottom of his train will be going today. Almost immediately, the signals come up as the switches flip for 603's path, and the engineer on sight of them notches it out of the curve. Q603, though late today, runs every night. Leaving Waycross headed south for Winston Yard, now just down the hill, with Bone Valley traffic like 811, but a bunch of other stuff mixed in. Empty phosphate hoppers, loaded sulfur tanks, and a bunch of other miscellaneous freight for miscellaneous industries that reside around Lakeland. Loads for which can be riding on anything from boxcars to center beams to flat cars. And quite a few of them. About 15 miles to the north as 603 made his way down through Kathleen, the defect detector there clocked the train in at about 9,500 feet. Now, for a train that long, is it really that smart to be running one locomotive on it? Well, the answer is definitely not. And this may come as a surprise to a lot of you, but they're not running a solo motor today. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. How in the hell is this possible? ES44AH number 3039 would be running as a mid-train distributed power locomotive. But the what the H part of this thing comes in when you realize that these AC4400 locomotives, like the one leading, are not DPU equipped, meaning they never had the ability to run in DPU service or connect to another locomotive for that purpose. Though in recent weeks that has changed. On the contrary to some of the AC44 rebuilds coming out in the 7000 or 7200 series, some of the older original AC4400s were not rebuilt, but rather were simply given DPU capabilities. This was only a handful of them, I'd say no more than maybe 20, but it's really interesting to come across, because it was never a reality until now. It was just after 11 a.m. now. Some friends would come out and meet up, Amtrak would come and go, but ultimately, the main target for us now was appearing on the radar to the north, so that was where we turned the wheel. Driving up US 98 out of Lakeland and up toward Vitis Junction and the S-Line. All the while hearing that Q452 back in the woods, having now finished his business over in Winston, and now freshly crewed, taking off from Winston through the green swamp, headed north for Waycross. We had left town out ahead of him, but until you get out of Lakeland, US 98 is all but a traffic light garden. It's not until you hit the open road that you might have a chance at it. And we heard him call signal after signal as the distance between us and him decreased by about a mile a minute. Crossing the S-Line and turning down onto the old Lakeland Highway, it would reveal that we were still just barely out in front. So, winding through the back country of Dade City, rolling towards downtown, and pulling over at a crossing real quickly to shoot it, with only about a few minutes to spare.
226, CSX 3338.
Very front, rock loads fresh out of the lime rock quarries of South Florida, and right behind that cut, loaded phosphate hoppers, acquired from his stop at Winston, fresh out of the Bone Valley with diammonium phosphate for customers up north. They could have made this plethora of hoppers its own unit train, but why would they do that? That's the logic of precision scheduled railroading, which logistically makes sense. Why have a whole nother crew and a whole nother train when they could just put it on this train, which would have run this way at this time, regardless of whether they ran that other train or not? But in corporate eyes, that's just one less pair of people that they have to pay for their time. This 10,000 foot long train pulled by a similar engine set as Q603 pounds the switch at South End Dade City. The 15,000 foot long siding that starts here is often a favored spot for dispatchers to schedule meets. After chilling around at the Dade City depot afterwards for about half an hour, our target was still nearing us from the north, and we had a spot that we planned to go to for that one. So we hit the road just a few minutes later to get there. Here we come, Wildwood. It's not often that we make our way up here, but today it was for quite the occasion.
Flower 1776, I'll pull it down to you.
If you were one of the many people out for this train, I don't need to explain it, but into Wildwood we came for Q453, as we heard on the radio that he was switching Wildwood Yard pretty much in conjunction with Q452 that we just saw. And pulling into Wildwood, here's what we came for.
3-step on the 3338.
The Honoring Our Veterans Spirit engine number 1776 would be heading Q453 out of Waycross this morning and down to Winston this evening. Pulling off on Lynham Street, many other rail fans are already there. On the crossing at the moment are both Q453 and 2. The 452 that we just saw is also working Wildwood on the other end of the yard, but since he's 10,000 feet long, he stretches all the way down here, blocking the road and the crossover track that 453 needs to use to work the yard himself. So they'd have to pull beyond the road and wait for 452 to depart before they could get their work done. Both Q453 and 2 work Wildwood Yard on their way to or from Waycross, although it doesn't take very long to do, and unlike Winston, there's no crew change at Wildwood.
I got you. Alright, we gonna come on, I'm ready for you. Alright, understand. Did on and off, we gone. Here we go. Thank you. That's fine, y'all did a good job. Appreciate it. Thank you.
452 is now off and running. All tracks were clear for 453 to make his drop off, which was all he had to do. The cuts he had were the cuts he left, and that was it. While depending on the complexity of what needs to be done, 453 can spend upwards of 3 to 4 hours here, it's not often he spends any more than 1. And here's why. Wildwood Yard is tiny as compared to its heydays back in the 40s, 50s, and even into the 60s, where passenger service and a plethora of freight duties were all prevalent here, more so than almost anywhere else in the state. Now, there's all but one local train that works customers within this region that originates here, and Q453 and 2 that leave cuts of cars for said local whenever they choose to run. Flying a bit further down, we can see that the mid-train DPU here is honoring our first responders, number 911. Having been fairly recently repaired up in Huntington, West Virginia, after a little bit of an incident in Florence, South Carolina, involving a side swipe in a yard that completely tore off its right side handrails. But she's back up and running, and will be assisting 1776 in their armed run to Winston, which was about to begin, because the crew was all done here. Once they dropped that cut in the yard, it was just back to their train and south.
Here we go.
Thank you,
Y'all whack.
Alright, how much?
Why, thank you, Steven and Max. Road's still in front of y'all, you know. It was the road we'd be taking down to Lake Panisofsky to where we'd start our chase down the S-line of Q453-25. Pulling off at Panisofsky, he's only a few miles out.
453-25, locomotive 267, cleared. Coleman.
Alright, that's 9/11. It's time to run. Back through the woods, the middle of Lakuchi would be the next spot. Leaving Lakuchi before 453 completely cleared, I thought I had given myself plenty of time to get down to Dade City and set up for a shot there.
Road, I'd honk at him as we, oh geez.
Yeah, no we did not. The train never got out in front, but through Dade City, the train was no more than 1,000 feet behind us.
453, 25, let's post 16, 17, 76, clear south of Dade City, main to main southbound.
Just a ways up the road, I pulled off at Ellerslie thinking I could make that work. And I did, but just barely.
453, 25, let's post 16, 17, 76,
Rolling down on the last mile stretch through Richland, Vitis Junction was as far south as we could chase this thing, as that was where he'd make his left turn into the green swamp that is almost completely inaccessible and by no means chaseable. But this last stretch would not be forgiving to us. No more than another minute passes before we're all screaming into Vitis, and hardly any usable footage time. This shot was really tight. I'd wiped the sweat mustache off my face as Q453 rounded the corner onto the Vitis subdivision. It was finally over. Wildwood to Vitis. Wow, it was quite the experience, but man, was it heart racing. That, coupled with everything else that we saw today down in Lakeland and elsewhere, I am very surprised that a Saturday yielded results like this. I'll take a quick moment to congratulate everyone who was able to get out and catch this one. Since these Pride and Service units aren't captive in the state anymore, to see them down here is quite the treat, and definitely one worth the sweat. At 6:15 p.m. that concludes our day out on the high iron, and I'm sure as y'all know by now I'll be back pretty soon, chasing something I feel like through an area of my preference. And until then, this is Kotabeaner, and I'll see y'all out there, somewhere, on the Sunshine State Rails.